So this is a little different, and I'm so grateful that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Sheila Cameron, ladies and gentlemen.
Hi, everybody.
The director of the New Life Counseling Center, and she's the one I go to for all sorts of questions around these kinds of situations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I say thank you to you on behalf of all mental health providers, all people struggling in silence with mental health issues, and also as a person who has mental health in her family history. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That means a lot. I'm slow because I've been intimidated. But I tell you what, I'll let you take the hard questions, and I'll take the biblical ones.
Okay.
I want to start simply by recognizing that the Bible and the worldview within much of it has a really bitter harshness to it, especially in terms of the difficult experiences that we have in life. And we see that worldview whenever someone who is suffering is asked, well, what did you do? Implying that they deserve what they get. We hear that in the story of Job. His friends ask him, what did you do? We hear that in the Pharisees asking Jesus about the man who was born blind, who sinned and caused him to be born blind. We see that in the prophets as they talk about the exile that the Israelites had to endure as being their fault. They did something that caused Babylon to invade and conquer and send them into exile. And while it's true, there's a lot of bad things that can happen because of the choices we make. That's not true in every situation. And the biblical worldview is thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years old, and it knew nothing about science and biology and chemistry and physiology and psychology, knew nothing about depression. And so I have to confess, I know very little about depression. Would you help us know what it is and what causes it?
Yeah, and I think that, all those unknowns that you're talking about, that's why there's a lot of stigma. So you and the church, in leadership, creating a space for this, it's one step towards destigmatizing this. So there isn't so much shame. So people can talk about it openly as the medical illness that it is. So what is it? Kenton and the kids defined it actually really well. So this generation is opening up more and talking about it more, which is wonderful. But really, it is a common, serious medical illness. It really affects the way an individual thinks, feels, and behaves. And it impairs us. It impairs the way we feel. It's marked by excessive sadness, not just sadness that, is healthy and normal, but it's excessive. It's debilitating. There's hopelessness involved, feelings of excessive guilt, right, and despair. So it's also ongoing, just as the kids had said here, it's ongoing. They know that. It doesn't just fade. So if you are diagnosed, by a professional who knows the criteria, you have to be experiencing those symptoms and those feelings for at least 2 weeks or more. And oftentimes it is more by the time someone comes in. Typically, and this is research shows, that someone would be struggling for at least 10 years with a mental health illness prior to coming in for their first treatment. Wow. And it also affects 1 in 10. 1 in 10 Americans struggle with depression. So when I say it's common, it is common. If we look around this room, that's a whole lot of us. That might be 20 of us in this room alone suffering in silence. And it's the #1 cause of disability in the world.
That's astonishing. And to think somebody suffers for 10 years before getting help. I have a dear friend, one of my best friends, who suffers from depression. And we've been friends for decades, and she's been very forthright with depression and with her illness. And truthfully, the only time I've really seen anything of depression in her was that she fiercely avoids seeing sad movies. Yeah. And yet, a few years ago, her medication got off, and I saw what depression does. And it was only for maybe 6 weeks before she got it straightened out, but just the weight of the world on her shoulder, you could see her just carrying this heaviness, and she would try and talk about it, and she would just cry. And it's so hard to watch people you love go through that, and she wanted things to be different, and I wanted things to be different for her, and I was at a loss. How do we help?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like your presence there, a loving presence, is the biggest help, to consistently check in on somebody. I think also the biggest thing initially is to not ignore it. Sometimes we shy away because we feel, we notice something's wrong. There's a shift in our friends or our loved ones, our coworkers. There's a shift, and we see that they're trying to hide it, so we won't make them embarrassed and we won't address it. The biggest thing is going and acknowledging. When I work with clients, they say that it's painful that, I'm suffering, I'm struggling, and then I know that this person notices, and they don't, it doesn't matter to them. So the fact that you even just addressed it and your presence is there, and then you could take steps to advocate if they're willing. Can I help you find a provider? Have you spoke to your doctor? When was the last time you ate or slept? But also try not to put a lot of pressure, because ultimately they do know what's best for them and their timing, and just them knowing that you're there, that you notice, that you care, they'll hopefully come around, with some encouragement. But it's also very important to set a healthy boundary and know we're not, for the most part, we're not clinically trained, so it can put a lot of pressure on us too as a helper, and we don't want to take all that on. But just your presence and acknowledging and validating their feelings, and also letting them know that it's not their fault, is a very important thing.
Thank you, Sheila. I know that in those conversations I had with her during this time, there was just always one thing after another, and I could just see it building up, and her ability to kind of fine-tune what to do first. And it was so hard. So we just tried to say, okay, medication works. You got to get your appointment first. Do that first. I'll check, just to try and kind of push her away from what I couldn't do.
Right.
But to just be there for her.
Yeah. And medication is one avenue for treatment, so not everybody has to go on medication. And I think there's also this reluctance to even begin the process of getting assistance, because people automatically think, well, I don't want to be medicated by a doctor. And they think that that's the only route. That's not the only route. There's behavioral talk therapy with a clinician, like our clinicians at the New Life Counseling Center, where research does show, and self-report shows that you can get immediate symptom relief in 4 to 8 sessions alone with just talk therapy. Now, if there's a chemical imbalance going on, when the neurotransmitters in the brain are not working and they're off, the serotonin, the dopamine, the norepinephrine, the oxytocin, and that can be shown, that can be proven with brain scans and even blood work, then we might need to, introduce medication. But the best combination for treatment when someone with severe depression is the combination of both, is talk therapy, behavioral therapy, and medication.
That answer is why you're here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So the prophet Jeremiah, in the section we read this morning, he writes to the people who are in exile, and that was one of the most significant events of the Old Testament times. It was a defining event for the Israelites. They lost their national identity, their homeland, the temple, their way of life. And I can't imagine the hopelessness. And here comes Jeremiah with these words that I find to be so hopeful. God has a plan for you, and it's so future-oriented. He's saying essentially what you're experiencing now is temporary. Don't forget that, it's temporary. And yet it seems like depression really just hinders any kind of future thinking.
Yeah.
Am I right about that?
Yeah, you're right. Depression lies to us, and feelings sometimes lie to us. When people are suffering with depression, faith it seems like it's bleak, and we lose hope. Really, it's like this hopelessness that looms over us. But when I work with clients, they often, if they do have a relationship with God, and they do have faith, or they had it once before, they can go back to, I don't know why this struggle is going on, but I do feel, or I think that God has a plan for this. I'm hopeful in that maybe. And sometimes when people are severely impacted by depression, that hope sometimes is gone. But I believe that God created us as relational beings, and He put us in each other's lives for those moments, right? When we do lose faith, when we see our client, our friend, or our family member struggling, then we're there to lift them up. And hopefully that faith gets restored.
Absolutely. I asked my friend, who happens to be a United Methodist pastor, so she's a faithful person, and yet suffers. And so I asked her, what is the relationship between her depression and faith? And this is what she wrote. She says, while my faith is life-giving to me, it wasn't adequate to help heal chemical imbalances in my brain. The main way my faith has contributed to wholeness is giving me the courage to speak out, to try and destigmatize and just talk about it so that the faith community can understand we have much to offer in the way of support and connection. Talk about a plan for her life, right?
That's beautiful.
I mean, she is the one that has been speaking about mental illness in the church decades before I even thought about it. And so I owe her. I owe her.
That's beautiful. And pastors, people in the faith community struggle. That doesn't mean that if we have a relationship with God that we are immune to it. It's just another part of suffering and struggle.
Absolutely. And I think that our faith gives us community, right? Even our online community. It's harder now, for sure. Being careful with one another, but we're here, and there are ways to be connected that we shouldn't ignore. And I'm glad that you're here. I'm so glad that the New Life Counseling Center is here. What a beautiful ministry that I am grateful for inheriting and being a part of it. It's just really, really helpful. Anything else you want to say about depression or faith? Anything that we need to know as people who might be experiencing it or know of someone who is?
Yeah, just, don't turn your back. Don't shy away. If something seems off with a loved one or a neighbor, acknowledge it And the biggest thing that happens when depression sets in is a shift in mood, a shift in behaviors. So when you're noticing somebody withdraw and isolate, cancel plans constantly, sleep more, they're eating or sleep less, their eating behaviors and their appetite change, or even when they notice, they start to express somatic physical symptoms and ailments. Sometimes they don't pay attention to the feelings and the thoughts, but they say, gosh, and this is true for children too. It manifests with, I have a tummy ache, or my head hurts. And sometimes that's kind of the first way to start talking about, well, what stressors are going on? What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? So kind of just be a curious kind of investigator sometimes, and don't turn your back.
Really good words. Thank you, Sheila. The prophet Jeremiah, he offers a different kind of worldview. And the biblical worldview that talks about it being our fault, right? It had no medical modern understanding, right? But the Bible really wasn't intended to be a medical journal anyway.
Right.
It was intended to be a document, thousands of years old, right? To help us know the insights of the ages about who God is, about who we are, and about who we are in relationship to God. And those connections, I think Jeremiah had it right. God has a plan for each of us as individuals and for all of us together, and God wants us to be whole. And I firmly believe that when we suffer, God suffers with us.
Yes.
When we are not well, God gives us the resources to be well.
Yes.
And when we think we're alone, we really aren't.
No.
And I'm grateful for you.
Oh, thank you.
For both of you, you may have
my gosh.
noticed she's pregnant,
Yep.
and I'm so delighted.
Pray for us.
We will.
This is
we
number
will.
3.
Number 3 for her. And I wasn't exactly sure you'd make it to today, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Will you help me thank Sheila?
Thank you.